Imagine waking up in a world where one quiet man controls the fuel in your lamp, the oil in your machine, the railroads that move it, and the banks that finance it. He doesn't shout, he doesn't threaten, he simply waits, and entire companies collapse before lunch. This is the story of John D. Rockefeller, the man who didn't just build an oil company, he built a system the modern world still lives inside. Adjusted for today's economy, he was worth more than Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates combined. And yet, he wore the same plain black suit every single day. He ate the same simple breakfast, and he wrote down every penny he spent in a small leather notebook, just like he did as a 16-year-old boy with nothing. By the end of this video, you will look at your gas station, your bank, and even your local hospital differently, because you will see him standing quietly behind all of it. Welcome to Economy Rewind History. This is the day, the mind, and the empire of John D. Rockefeller. Before there was an empire, there was a boy who understood something earlier than almost anyone else on Earth. Money has rules, and the person who learns those rules first wins. He was born in 1839 in a small town in New York. His household was, in its own strange way, the perfect training ground for what he would become. His mother, Eliza, was rigid, devout, and obsessed with discipline. She believed that waste was a sin, and that every dollar had a duty to perform. His father, William, was almost her total opposite. A traveling salesman, a gambler, a man who sometimes vanished for months at a time. Historians now believe he lived a double life under a false name, selling fake medicine to desperate people across several states. Two forces collided inside one household: order and deception, discipline and persuasion. And inside one boy, both forces began shaping a future empire. At the age of 7, young John was already earning small amounts of money. He raised turkeys. He sold candy to his siblings at a markup. Then he loaned that money back to them at interest. At 16, he got his first real job as an assistant bookkeeper in Cleveland, Ohio. The salary was so small it's almost laughable by today's standards. But Rockefeller treated every cent like it mattered. He began keeping a personal ledger he proudly called Ledger A. In it, he recorded every cent earned and every cent spent. He tracked money with the same seriousness a general might use to track troop movements. That ledger would later be treated by historians as a sacred document, because in its pages you can see the exact mind that would one day control the global economy. Patient, obsessive, unemotional, and endlessly focused on the smallest details that everyone else considered beneath their attention. Now let's step directly into a single day inside his empire. Somewhere in the early 1880s, Standard Oil already controlled roughly 90% of American oil refining, and Rockefeller himself had become something closer to a myth than a man. He wakes before dawn without needing an alarm, because his body has been trained like a machine for decades. There is no lavish morning ritual, no army of servants fussing over him. He eats a light, almost ascetic breakfast. Sometimes nothing more than bread, fruit, and a small amount of milk. He does not drink coffee, he does not drink alcohol, he does not smoke. In an era when wealthy industrialists were famous for indulgence, Rockefeller lived like a monk who happened to own half of America's oil supply. He rides in his carriage into Manhattan. His destination is a modest, almost boring-looking building at 26 Broadway. Insiders nervously nicknamed it the Body, because everyone in the oil business understood what happened behind those walls. A decision made there could quietly destroy a company hundreds of miles away, before its owner even woke up that morning. Inside his office, the day begins not with conversation, but with numbers. Reports arrive detailing exactly how many barrels were refined overnight, exactly what freight rates were charged by which railroad, and exactly how much a rival refinery in Pittsburgh or Baltimore was struggling financially that week. Rockefeller reads these reports the way a general reads a battlefield map. He's not searching for reasons to celebrate. He's searching for weaknesses to exploit. He speaks so quietly that people who worked with him were often forced to lean in just to hear him. Many later admitted this was not an accident. Forcing another man to lean toward you is itself a form of psychological control. It makes him slow down. It makes him uncomfortable. It makes him strain just to catch your words. Rockefeller understood this instinctively, long before psychology was even a formal science. Business partners described negotiating with him as an almost unnerving experience. He never raised his voice. He never lost his temper. He simply waited, silent and immovable, until the other man, uncomfortable with silence, filled it with concessions. Throughout the late morning and afternoon, his true genius revealed itself, not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet, calculated patience. When financial panic swept the country, most businessmen panicked along with everyone else. They dumped assets at fire sale prices just to survive. Rockefeller famously did not panic. He had structured Standard Oil to keep enormous cash reserves, so during downturns, while his terrified competitors were desperately selling, he could calmly walk in and buy their companies for a fraction of their true value. He referred to economic depressions, chillingly, as allies of his business, That phrase reveals exactly how differently his mind worked compared to almost everyone else around him. Where others saw disaster, he saw discount pricing. This single psychological trait may be the biggest reason Standard Oil grew as large as it did. The ability to remain calm and strategic while everyone else was emotional and reactive. Afternoon meetings often involved railroad executives, bankers, and refiners. Many of them were quietly terrified of him, because everyone in the industry knew what crossing Standard Oil could mean. Your freight rates could mysteriously increase, your oil barrel supply could mysteriously dry up, or your access to pipelines could mysteriously vanish within weeks. By early evening, Rockefeller returned home for a quiet family dinner. He said grace, he spent time with his children, and he went to bed early, ready to repeat the exact same disciplined routine again the next morning. This was not the lifestyle of a flamboyant robber baron throwing lavish parties. It was the lifestyle of a disciplined operator, running what was, in effect, the most powerful private company on the planet, one calm, quiet decision at a time. So how exactly did a bookkeeper's assistant from Cleveland end up controlling nearly the entire oil industry of the United States? It began in 1863, when Rockefeller entered the oil business, almost by accident. But even then, he sensed something almost nobody else understood at the time. Thousands of prospectors were rushing to drill for oil in Pennsylvania. They were gambling everything on the hope of striking a gusher. Most of them went bankrupt within a year or two. They became victims of unpredictable wells and violently swinging prices. Rockefeller looked at this chaos and asked a different question entirely. Instead of asking, "How do I find oil?" he asked, "Who controls the oil once it's found?" He realized that refining, transporting, and distributing oil was actually far more valuable and far more controllable than the wild, unpredictable business of drilling for it. While thousands of men bet their futures on the ground beneath their feet, Rockefeller quietly built refineries. He understood a truth that would define his entire career. In any gold rush, the real fortune is made by the person who controls the roads, the barrels, and the pipelines, not the person swinging the pickaxe. In 1870, he founded Standard Oil. And from that very first year, his ambition was not simply to compete in the oil industry. It was to eliminate competition as a concept entirely. His method became infamous, and it started right in his home city of Cleveland. In a matter of weeks, during an event historians now call the Cleveland Massacre, Rockefeller approached one rival refiner after another. His proposition was simple, almost hypnotic. Sell your company to me now, quietly, at a fair price. Or watch me destroy you slowly through a price war you have absolutely no chance of surviving. It wasn't an empty threat. Standard Oil had already secured secret rebate deals with major railroads. That meant Rockefeller's oil traveled at drastically reduced shipping costs, while every one of his competitors paid full price for the exact same railway lines. In some documented cases, competitors were even charged a hidden surcharge. That surcharge was secretly funneled directly back into Standard Oil's own accounts. Imagine running a race where your opponent doesn't just run faster than you, he also collects a toll from you personally every single time you take a step forward. That was the impossible position independent oil refiners found themselves trapped in. Within weeks, dozens of Cleveland's refineries had been absorbed into Standard Oil. Those who cooperated became wealthy partners in the growing empire. Those who resisted often lost everything they had built. But secret railroad deals were only one piece of a much larger machine, a machine far more sophisticated than simple intimidation. Rockefeller understood that true, lasting power does not come from controlling one link in a supply chain. It comes from controlling every single link, from the ground to the customer's front door. He built his own barrel manufacturing plants. This cut costs so dramatically that competitors could not produce barrels as cheaply as Standard Oil, even when they bought the exact same raw materials. He built his own pipelines. He bypassed railroads entirely whenever it suited him. He built his own warehouses, his own distribution networks, his own sales forces. Economists today call this strategy vertical integration. But to the men living through it in the 1870s and 1880s, it felt very different. It felt like watching a single company slowly swallow an entire industry alive, piece by piece, refinery by refinery, city by city, until genuine competition became almost mathematically impossible. By 1882, Rockefeller had organized his sprawling holdings into a revolutionary legal structure. It was called the Standard Oil Trust, and it was deeply controversial. This innovation was so unprecedented that American lawmakers had to invent new categories of corporate law, just to describe and eventually regulate what he had built. Through this trust, a small handful of trustees controlled dozens of technically separate companies. Rockefeller stood firmly at the center. These companies operate under different names in different states, but in reality, they were all part of the same empire. This allowed Standard Oil to quietly dominate roughly 90% of American oil refining, while appearing, on paper, to be many unrelated businesses. This is where the story stops being just history and becomes genuinely fascinating economics, because Rockefeller's monopoly was not built purely on intimidation. It was built on staggering, almost frightening efficiency. Standard Oil could refine oil more cheaply than almost anyone else. It could transport oil more reliably, and it could sell oil more consistently than virtually any competitor on Earth. For years, this actually caused the retail price of kerosene for ordinary American families to fall, not rise, even while Rockefeller controlled the market. This is the uncomfortable truth most textbooks skip entirely. Monopolies are not always inefficient, lazy, or wasteful. Sometimes they are terrifyingly efficient. And that efficiency is exactly what makes them dangerous. When a single company becomes so dominant that it no longer needs to compete on quality or price, something changes. It can quietly begin dictating wages, dictating supply, and dictating the survival of entire regional economies, often without a single dramatic villain moment. It happens slowly, mathematically, invisibly, one quiet decision at a time. Until one day, the entire industry simply belongs to one man. Oil didn't just make John D. Rockefeller extraordinarily rich, it fundamentally rewired the American and global economy in ways we are still living inside of today. Kerosene lit homes across rural America decades before electricity reached those same communities. It transformed daily life for millions of families who had previously relied on candles and whale oil. Later, as the automobile revolution exploded in the early 20th century, oil became something even more powerful. It was no longer just a household product. It became the literal fuel of modern civilization itself. It powered factories, ships, cars, airplanes, and eventually the militaries that would decide the outcomes of 2 world wars. Whoever controlled oil didn't simply control an industry anymore. They controlled the pace of modern life, the direction of modern life, and the very survival of modern life. This single enormous insight is precisely why oil wealth would go on to shape foreign policy. It would ignite international conflicts and determine the rise and fall of entire nations for the next century. That is why, even today, in a world of electric cars and renewable energy debates, oil still matters. The price of a single barrel of crude oil can still shake global markets overnight. In 1911, after years of mounting public fury, the United States Supreme Court finally ruled against Standard Oil. That fury had been fueled largely by journalist Ida Tarbell. Her investigation into Standard Oil's ruthless business tactics was explosive, and it was meticulously researched. The court ruled that Standard Oil had violated federal antitrust law. It ordered the company broken apart into 34 separate independent companies. Newspapers across the country treated this ruling as the death of an empire, the long-awaited fall of the most feared monopolist in American history. But in reality, it was almost the exact opposite. When Standard Oil's stock was divided proportionally among these 34 new companies, Rockefeller benefited enormously. As the largest single shareholder, he suddenly held significant pieces of every single one of them. Financial markets immediately recognized how valuable these individual pieces truly were, especially once they were freed from the weight of the original monopoly. So the total value of Rockefeller's holdings did not shrink after the breakup. It exploded. Within just a few years, John D. Rockefeller became, almost by accident, the richest man the modern world had ever produced. He became wealthier after the breakup than he'd ever been while running the trust itself. Several of those original 34 companies still exist today. They simply operate under different names. ExxonMobil is the direct descendant of 2 of the largest pieces, Standard Oil of New Jersey and Standard Oil of New York. Those 2 pieces quietly merged back together in 1999, 88 years after regulators had forced them apart. Chevron traces its lineage directly to Standard Oil of California. What the United States government tried to permanently dismantle in 1911 did not fully disappear. It slowly, patiently reassembled itself over the following decades, not as one single visible company that anyone could point to and recognize, but as an interconnected web of global energy giants. Energy giants that still influence gas prices, geopolitics, and the daily economy you live inside right now. But oil was only the first branch of an empire that would grow far beyond anything Rockefeller himself could have originally imagined. In 1913, he established the Rockefeller Foundation. It became one of the largest and most influential philanthropic organizations ever created in human history. The foundation went on to fund groundbreaking medical research, global public health campaigns, and major scientific breakthroughs across dozens of countries. Its work included significant contributions toward fighting diseases like yellow fever and hookworm, especially in regions across the Americas and beyond. Rockefeller also funded the creation of the University of Chicago almost entirely on his own. He transformed what began as a modest institution into one of the world's most prestigious research universities, a status it still holds today. He established the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. That institution continues operating right now as Rockefeller University. It has been home to numerous Nobel Prize winners in medicine and scientific research. His descendants later built a Rockefeller Center in the heart of Manhattan, one of the most iconic real estate developments in American history. The family's philanthropic influence also extended into international affairs. It helped secure the land in New York City that would eventually house the headquarters of the United Nations. Meanwhile, on the financial side of the empire, another branch continued growing. Chase National Bank was closely tied to Rockefeller family interests for generations. Through decades of consolidation, it eventually became part of what we now know as J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the largest and most powerful financial institutions on the planet. From oil to banking to elite universities to global medicine to international philanthropy, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The empire did not end in that Supreme Court courtroom in 1911. It simply changed uniforms, changed its public face, and kept expanding, quietly, patiently, decade after decade. So, what does Rockefeller's influence actually look like today? Especially in a world where almost nobody under 50 has even heard the phrase Standard Oil Trust. Every time you fill your car with gasoline at an Exxon or Chevron station, you're still touching his empire. In a very real and traceable sense, you're buying from a fragment of his original 19th century company. Every time a groundbreaking new drug moves through clinical trials at a major research university, his influence echoes again, especially when that research is funded through foundation models that trace back to the system he helped pioneer. The concept of large-scale strategic philanthropy did not become powerful by accident. Rockefeller helped create that template, using enormous private wealth deliberately and systematically to shape public health, education, and scientific research on a truly global scale. It is a model the wealthiest individuals on Earth still consciously follow today, from tech billionaires to modern industrial families. His story also quietly reshaped how governments around the world think about monopoly power itself. Every major antitrust case brought against a modern technology giant carries his shadow. Every heated debate in Congress about whether a company has grown too big traces back to the Standard Oil case. Too big for its own good, or too big for the public's good. The legal and philosophical roots lead directly back to 1911. In other words, the very rules now used to investigate companies like Google, Amazon, and Meta exist largely because of Rockefeller, because of what one 19th century oil company did more than 100 years earlier. Now let's talk honestly about what any modern entrepreneur, investor, or ambitious mind can genuinely learn from this story. For a few minutes, set aside in moral judgment. The first lesson is this: control the infrastructure, not just the product. Rockefeller did not become the richest man in history by drilling for oil himself. He became the richest man in history by controlling the refining process. The transportation networks, the barrels, and the boring, invisible, unglamorous parts of the industry. The parts almost nobody else was willing to fight for. The second lesson is that downturns should be treated as opportunities, not disasters. While panicked, emotional competitors sold their companies for pennies on the dollar during economic crashes, Rockefeller simply waited. He was disciplined. He was deliberately cash-rich. And when the panic came, he bought. The third lesson is that information itself is leverage. His near-obsessive focus on precise, granular data gave him an enormous advantage. Exact costs, exact freight rates, exact competitor weaknesses. These details gave him a decision-making advantage his rivals simply could never match, no matter how talented they were. His competitors were often more emotional, more flamboyant, and more reactive. Rockefeller was quieter, colder, and far more prepared. The fourth lesson is that reputation and patience consistently beat noise and speed. He rarely shouted, he rarely rushed his decisions, and he rarely revealed his true hand in negotiations. That quiet, controlled, almost eerie demeanor became one of his most feared weapons. In any boardroom he entered, these principles remain timeless rules for building durable power. Patience, information, infrastructure, and emotional discipline. Whether you're building an oil empire in the 1870s or a technology company today. But no honest telling of this story can ignore its far darker chapters. Because Rockefeller's empire was not built on brilliance and discipline alone. It was also built on the deliberate, calculated crushing of smaller competitors. Secret railroad rebates gave Standard Oil an almost unbeatable advantage. Even by the loose ethical standards of the era, those deals were considered deeply unfair. Eventually, they were ruled illegal outright. Independent oil producers who refused to sell often found themselves financially strangled. Their companies did not collapse because their product was inferior. They collapsed because Standard Oil controlled the transportation networks their survival depended on. Labor conditions across many industries connected to Rockefeller family wealth were often harsh and dangerous, and the Rockefeller name became permanently associated with one of the darkest chapters in American labor history, the Ludlow Massacre of 1914. A Colorado coal mining operation partly owned by the Rockefeller family became the site of a deadly confrontation. Striking coal miners clashed with state militia forces. The confrontation resulted in the deaths of numerous miners, along with several women and children. They had been living in a makeshift tent colony. The public backlash following Ludlow was severe. It badly damaged the Rockefeller family's public image, And it forced the family to rethink how they managed labor relations, public relations, and philanthropy going forward. In many ways, Ludlow accelerated the shift toward the carefully cultivated philanthropic empire we recognize today. Ida Tarbell's fearless investigative journalism exposed years of hidden, ruthless business practices. For the first time, the American public saw the machinery behind Standard Oil. Rockefeller became, for a significant period of his life, one of the most hated men in the country, and one of the most feared. He became a living symbol of unchecked corporate power. During the era historians now call the Gilded Age, his story is, at its core, a genuinely unsettling case study. A study in how enormous efficiency and enormous cruelty can exist within the exact same system, sometimes within the exact same boardroom decision, made by the exact same calm, quiet man. So why does any of this still matter, more than a century after John D. Rockefeller's death in 1937? At the remarkable age of 97, it matters because the fundamental questions his life forces us to confront have never gone away. Not for one single decade. How much power should one company ever be allowed to hold? How much power should one individual ever be allowed to hold? Especially over an essential resource that entire nations depend on for survival. Where exactly is the line between building something brilliantly efficient and building something quietly, dangerously monopolistic? Can enormous, world-changing philanthropy ever truly make up for the human cost of how that wealth was originally accumulated? These questions are not confined to the age of oil derricks, steam trains, and iron-fisted industrialists in top hats. They are the exact same questions we are still asking today about technology billionaires, energy conglomerates, and global financial institutions, the institutions that quietly dominate our modern world. In many genuine and unsettling ways, we are still living inside Rockefeller's blueprint, a blueprint he carefully drew more than a century ago. It has simply been refined over time, not by breaking power apart for good, but by learning, generation after generation, how to make that power look invisible, how to make it look charitable, how to make it look inevitable. And that may be the most unsettling lesson buried inside this entire story. The most powerful empires in human history rarely announce themselves anymore with crowns, or armies, or conquering flags planted in foreign soil. Sometimes they announce themselves quietly, patiently, through a gas station sign glowing on a dark highway, through a university crest stitched onto a graduation gown, through a hospital wing named after a family foundation, or through a global health initiative funded discreetly behind the scenes. By private philanthropic dollars, nobody thinks to question. John D. Rockefeller understood something long before anyone had invented a formal word for it. The deepest, most durable form of power is never the kind people fear openly. It is the kind people simply forget they are standing inside of, every single day of their ordinary lives. So the next time you fill up your tank at a gas station, ask yourself one uncomfortable question. The next time you walk past a gleaming research hospital, ask it again. The next time you hear about a global health initiative quietly funded by a private foundation, ask it again. How much of the modern world you live inside every day was quietly built by one man, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, decision by decision? A man history taught you to remember only as a villain, while you forgot to keep watching what came next. If this story changed the way you see the modern world, even just a little, subscribe to Economy Rewind History. Because empires built on money and power never truly disappear. They simply learn, patiently, generation after generation, how to change their name.